30?
No, it was 9:30.
9:30?
No, you know what? No,
It
because
seemed like
no, because we had another session at the door, so it could have been about 10. We didn't get out the door until probably about. We started leaving at 9:30. We probably didn't get out the door until about 10. You're right.
Yeah, the presence was so good that nobody wanted to leave.
Yeah.
and I think we did some stuff together as a group that was really good too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that could probably lead to Norma's first question. Did you? Because that probably leads into what you, Norma, you're going to ask first of all.
Yeah, about the angels?
Oh, that or I didn't know about the. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, because I have like to it, which there was a sense of a changing of the guards of the angel. Now I've heard of new angels joining, but we had where one group of angels came and took over, and each person had the same kind of angels that came. Have you? And the ones that were with us kind of left, like a changing of the guard. Have you heard about that sort of scenario, Mike?
Um, I mean, I think when you begin to engage in your destiny, and when things begin, seasons change, then angelic angels change, because there are angels that may be assigned to you for a season. You know, I mean, the angel of, let's say, the angel of the church or whatever is probably going to be there, but there are different angels that can be assigned for different seasons that you go through. And as you say, a changing of the guard would be indicating that that's one season's ended or a new one's beginning, and there may well need to be different angels that are assigned for that season. So yeah, we have a number of angels that are assigned to us here. Depending on how that's administrated, depends on who of them signs up and turns up. But we also have angels that are engaged with our different mountains, and they can engage depending on what we're doing. So if you think of all the different mountains and all the different things that you've got, then there can be changes, and some of those changes can be a day thing. God is wanting to do something today, so so a whole lot of angels get assigned for that day, for that season, for that session. It's being flexible to cooperate with them, and you're obviously sensitive enough to pick it up. So then it will be, okay, is this a new season? How do we cooperate with this? And in essence, it seems that you got to look at what have you been doing that might have facilitated that. Because it isn't just about God assigning new angels to you, it's about you having the governmental authority to assign the angels to particular roles. So I think you may find that some of the things you've been doing have potentially facilitated that change of angels. So yeah, that there's no problem with that. But when it happens, make sure you sort of then find out what is this to do with. Yeah.
Yeah, because there was a sense of everyone having one assigned, and there was a sense that the ones that were there before, it was like a handing over of a baton or something. So those would be angels that actually do the work of the Ekklesia per se. Correct?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of angels that are engaged, obviously, with the Ekklesia, because you have the angel of the bench, the angels engaged with the bench of seven, and also you've got people. You all got your own personal angels as well, who also participate in what goes on.
Right.
And I think it's being open to new things in this, and realizing that as you become more sensitive to the angelic realm, you begin to pick these type of things up, and then it will be like, okay, what does this mean? how do we then move forward with this? How does this affect what we're going to do from now on? Because let's say you had a whole load of angels that were engaging previously, which were, I don't know, let's say the Cash Millam angels, and they gathered around your worship and they loved the intimacy and everything else. And then, you have a whole load of the seraphim turn up. They're going to do different things in your midst, depending on what order of angels they are. They're going to have a different function. And sometimes that can be a season that God assigns, and we go into that season. I think the more mature we get in legislating things, then we begin to assign the canopy of angels and the different angel orders according to how we're administrating. So let's say we want a season of healing, then we need to assign healing angels to come. It's that type of government, but you obviously need to have a mandate for that. It's not, oh, well, we fancy a few of these angels this week, so we'll sort of give an invite. There's got to be hey, we're authorized to administrate this. And then you use the authority then to begin to see the ordinances of God assigned for those particular seasons, or particular, maybe even specific settings and purposes.
We do that a lot on our hangouts, is when we get a sense that we need to decrease stuff and assign the angels. So we generally do that, call and assign the angels for particular things that we sense the Lord is doing when we're on our hangouts together. Not, a meeting, because we have the hangouts more regularly, so we generally do that. There's also one other thing regarding, our mentoring style type hangout, where we have different people, different sort of maturity levels, and so we've gone to a second hangout, and there's a sense that, how do I say this? There's a sense that we have a large gap between folks. Like, some people are just very fast, and they can see, they can, they really have no problems engaging, whereas we have some that are new, but these people are also kind of new to us, kind of, but we also have others that are really just babies, kind of trying to catch up, to engage in this. So that's a large gap, but we only have so much time, so we've placed them together with the hopes that the ones that are more advanced would encourage the ones that are not. But there's a sense that the ones that are advanced are just so rearing to go that it's difficult to kind of gel.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. I think what you have to impress with people is personal responsibility. That you cannot develop a lifestyle from one hangout, every week or so. It has to be a daily developing personal intimacy with God and practicing to build up your spiritual senses so that you can see and hear and engage. And I think that's where helping people to see this as a journey and a process is really important, and stressing, look, we're only, all we can do in the sessions that you have corporately is to provide a testimony of an experience or a doorway. People have to develop that for themselves every day. And I think if you stress that, then they're not going to be disappointed by, oh, I didn't see this. It can take time, and it's your commitment to developing the relationship and getting the basics right, which builds the platform and the foundation for everything else. And some people may be raring to go in legislation, but without the relationship, then that's going to be coming from probably an immature perspective, because the relationship is what gives you the foundations of knowing the heart of God and the mind of God and the will of God, that then you can then begin to outwork governmentally, rather than, hey, let's all go and jump in and legislate and do things. without having the foundation of intimacy and relationship there, which creates the environment for maturity and change and transformation. And I think you have to stress, no one is going to mature without change and without transformation, and therefore some of the old things have to go on the process. If I'm going to become who God created me to be, then I have to be willing for Him to strip away who I'm not created to be, and that's probably where a lot of people. You want to encourage people to participate, but you don't want to set them up with a false expectation that everything's going to be wonderful just because we're seeing heaven. There's a whole process of living sacrifice, maturing, transformation that brings us into maturity. And it's having that balance between, yes, the excitement of pursuing something new, but the realization that it's going to take some discipline and hard work to actually see us matured. You don't mature by having anyone lay hands on you. You mature by overcoming and growing and being transformed and through that process. So I think, realistic expectations, I think, are good for anyone at the beginning of anything, so that they don't go into it with a false sense of how easy it's going to be. You obviously want to open up, look, this is something that God's opening up, heaven's open for us, but that's just one aspect of developing a lifestyle. Most of the work needs to be done on the inside, because that's where the river of life is going to flow through us. So the gateways and everything else is a big part of that.
Because one of the issues tends to be, Mike, as it spoke to me, was that because we have a close group with the bench of 7, but we've opened an open group on another night where everyone else can come in, plus anyone else who wants to join from the bench of 7. But the thing that happens is some of the people that are in the open group feel they're much more advanced spiritually in this. So it goes too slow because you have other people who are just coming into it. And the talk I had with a couple of the people was, but this is as much, it doesn't matter how advanced you are. What it is, it's coming together in spirit to grow together and entwine our spirits together. We're learning to take a common mandate, and we can't be off there. That's one of the problems, being lone rangers out there trying to get up to the galactic court and everything else, because it's more than that. There's a purpose behind this. And unless you can come together, you're never going to be and fulfill all that you're supposed to be. Mm. And so it doesn't matter that you're more advanced. That's irrelevant, because we're all equal. In God's sight, we all come together and grow together.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing where if people feel that they're more advanced, then they have the ability to outwork their personal mountains in that way. But when we come together, it's like freely we've received, freely we want to give. It's about discipleship. It's about equipping, helping, supporting one another, being there for one another. And that, it requires a degree of humility and a willingness to serve others. And I think that's the key in all of this. It's all about serving. None of it's about position or wanting to be recognized, because if it is, then there's a lack of maturity in that. And ultimately, just because someone may be gifted doesn't mean that they're mature. Because a lot of people have all sorts of crazy encounters and see all sorts of amazing things. It doesn't mean they've got the character to back it up, or the maturity levels that God will entrust them with that level of authority. I had many forerunner experiences of encounters, but it didn't mean I was able to function in it all until I grew and matured and went through the process of transformation that enabled me to have the level of character in some of those areas to be able to be trusted by God. And some of these things do test some of those attitudes and mindsets and ways of thinking about it, which God will try and bring to the surface. And if people have the attitude, oh, they're holding me back, that's a really immature attitude, because you cannot be held back. It's your own attitude that will hold you back, because that's an indication that you're using these things to feed to give you identity, rather than your identity, and that releases you into this. And then once you do that, you know that this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. The whole point is we're being prepared to be a storehouse for the next generation, to mentor the next generation and pass the baton and to equip them. That means we have to have a willingness to be the floor that they stand on, which is an attitude of maturity, which
I think the other thing is that the whole purpose of a bench is to form an ecclesia, to come into a mystic union in Christ together, to form shadows, to fulfill the plans, purposes, and desires He has together between us, where you get that synergy between us, alone in some of our other mountains maybe, but this is where we come together, and this is such an important exercise to go through and learn how to come together as you're drawn together. And unless you do that, learn to do that, you're never going to be able to fulfill that part on one of your mountains anyway.
No, I mean, there's a sense where, you have to become living stones that are joined together into God's blueprint. And that's where you see whether people are wanting to do their own thing and have their own agenda, or whether they're willing to serve God's blueprint. And when we humble ourselves to serve God's blueprint, then He is quite capable of elevating us to a position of government to be able to do it. When we are trying to serve our own agenda, then He won't elevate people to a level of government, because He can't trust people with a wrong heart and a wrong motive. And this is where the thoughts and intentions of our heart and the trading floors and the basic issues of separating whether we're operating in the soul from soul or spirit comes in. It's very much all about me, myself, and I until I die, and then it's all about Him. And you get those attitudes that get exposed when people start to come together and they start competing for position or recognition or acknowledgement, all those things, which are the issues of immaturity that God wants to deal with. And ultimately, if we are individuals and we have an individual destiny, but God intertwines those destinies to work together. And that's what we're looking to find. Am I part of this blueprint? Do I fit as a living stone in this blueprint? Therefore, I'm willing to serve God through this blueprint, rather than, well, I'm just looking out for my own situation, and that's all that matters. And there is a sense of sacrifice. Am I willing to sacrifice to serve others? Because that's the whole point. Unless we're here to disciple others, then we're not fulfilling God's purpose for our lives anyway. Because we're all called to disciple others. And a true disciple, someone who's truly discipling someone will always be looking for that person to go further than they are. Not want to hold them back or keep them under them by withholding knowledge, or there's a lot of old mindsets and old things that get exposed once you begin to operate in a new dimension. You have to allow those things to be exposed, and you have to deal with them. And you have to create a culture of honor where you can tackle those things that come up, where you can do it. And to start with, you don't have to necessarily tackle it head on with somebody. But once you see some of the dynamics that are in place, you can get a strategy from God to enable people to own those dynamics, and then He'll deal with them in them. and you can do judicial things and court cases and various things to deal with the dynamics that come to the surface and get squeezed when people come together. You know, because everyone rubs off against each other. You know, and if you're going to be a living stone connected to somebody else, you really want to fit together well, which may need some rough edges rubbing off to enable that fit. And that's what we do in a relationship. We help rub each other's rough edges off if we're willing, and if we recognize that, and if we're open to create that environment where, yeah, you can speak the truth to me in love, and I want to speak the truth to you in love because I value you, and I want you to be the best you that you can be. Because everything about God loving the world is about He gave. So if we're going to be a demonstration of His love, then we have to be givers, not those that are receivers. And the whole thing again comes down to whether people are consumers or participators. You know, are they just wanting to consume? Feed me, feed me, feed me. You know, more. I want experience, 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 rather than the responsibility of participating, serving each other, loving each other, developing relationship with each other, and everything else. You know, but those are some of the tensions you find when you begin to start to gather people.
But what it seems to me anyway is, and I've noticed this over the last several years, that people that come in and go out, the biggest hindrance seems to be the identification of your calling or your agenda, and you're trying to take this and make it fit into your agenda or your calling, and because they're in an ecclesia, you're coming together to get His mandate, His calling together. It doesn't fit in, and you move on because it's not fitting into your agenda or your calling, and it seems to be such a blockage.
Yeah, well, some people it may not be their fit, and so you're very happy to see them move on because their destiny doesn't actually fit together with yours, and that's okay. And we've encouraged some people to move on here because they didn't fit, you know, or if they did fit, they weren't prepared to come into agreement with what God was calling them to do. Now, those that come in and have that sort of it's all about me type behavior, you have to be able to address it, you know, and you have to create an environment where God can address it. Otherwise, you know, and my view on that sort of stuff is to address it openly and honestly and say, hey, these are some of the things that we've noticed that happen when people engage something new. And be real about it. And just say, you know, have any of us recognized that we do that? Have we thought, how have we dealt with that in our own lives? Have testimonies where people have changed and that their attitudes have changed and their behaviors have changed as a result of recognizing that their agenda was impure. And a lot of it is all to do with position and recognition and affirmation.
And your problem is when you have a calling or an agenda, it doesn't allow you to come into rest. Because you're chasing after my calling. I've got to do this, and I'm called to do this. And you can't come into rest and just let Him, just open up to Him, just receive.
But not everybody's called to do this, I don't think. Like, you know, some people are called to do like other things. They're not all part of what we're doing.
Well, no, but go a little further. Is everyone called in some way to probably come into an ecclesia somewhere? Where they're to come into union with some group of people or people?
My view is yes, because I believe it's through the ecclesia that the manifold wisdom of God is made known. Therefore, I don't believe in independent people. I don't believe in parachurch organizations. It's the ecclesia which God has chosen, and that's people gathered around a blueprint. Those blueprints can be massively different, but they're gathered around something that God is calling them to do as a group of people, and that can be very different. And I think a lot of what we call parachurch ministry organizations should be actually recognizing themselves as an ecclesia. Now, the problem comes is when they don't want any personal responsibility for anyone involved, they just want to do things. Because if there's no discipleship involved in any sort of thing that you're doing, then it isn't of God. As far as I'm concerned, there has to be discipleship in anything that God is raising up. So if people feel they have a call, that call can only be fulfilled out of the rest of knowing your identity. Any identity that's got from what you do, and this is why people strive so much to do things, because that's where they're getting their identity, that feeds into the need for their soul to find identity and recognition and affirmation and approval through what they do rather than from who they are. And we have to present something which values people for who they are rather than what they do, which means a change in how we affirm, encourage. And that really has to be foundational in everything, a different way of affirming, encouraging, nurturing people in identity rather than performance. So like when new people come and join us here, we probably don't even entertain asking them to be involved in anything for at least 12 months until they really feel, actually, I belong here. And I really want to be out working who I am here. And that, for a lot of people, they struggle with, because they're immediately, because some of them are quite gifted and they're quite used to being used for doing things, they want you to use them, because that's where they get their value and that's where they get their self-worth and everything else, from being used. And when you refuse to use them, they can feel, well, it's not much point me being here, because, well, I'm not doing anything. And that period of rest and finding that you're valued because of who you are rather than what you do for us is really, really important, because that's the test that will see whether people have their own agenda and whether people they want to pursue their own calling. And that often is revealed in their attitude towards, well, I'm not doing anything. I can't do anything, so there's nothing for me to do. So why would I need to be here? Because there's nothing for me to do. Because they're seeing belonging as doing rather than being. And it can be a challenge because most church environments essentially use and abuse people for their own ends to keep themselves going. So well, we need this, we need that. Well, how can we get someone to volunteer to do this? And, well, we have this vacancy, we need someone to do that. So, and then they feed on people's need to be needed, and they use that to get jobs filled. Whether it's the person's destiny, whether it's part of their gift or not, well, we need a job fill, and we need to find some volunteers. So there's an old way of doing things which really is trying to get people to do things whether they're fitted for it or not. And we've got to really move totally away from that and give people an opportunity to discover their value and worth in just being. Now, you have to address that openly and honestly, and actually share that. Have that as part of your foundational beliefs. Look, when you come and you gather here, we're wanting to find relationship, not performance. And I think you have to be able then to challenge the issues that arise and to create an environment where people can honestly express their concerns and feelings in those things, for then you to be able to identify this is coming from an old mindset or an old need or an unmet need, or the need for recognition from others. And you get that when that's in operation. You get people wanting to be friends with significant others. So if you're part of the bench of 3 or the bench of 7, then they'll want to know you. You know, if you're not, then really, are you worth spending any time developing a relationship with? Because really, you're not significant enough. You're not gonna give me a leg up. You're not gonna be worth. And all these, I know they're horrible attitudes, but actually they exist. You know, they really do exist. And I remember, I recognize this. My wife was a little less open to see some of those things, and I remember someone saying to her, "Well, I only really wanted to be your friend because you're Mike's wife," and it was just like it really hit her quite hard because she's a very relational person, and it was like, oh, you know, but sometimes that's what you have to help uncover to help people see that's not how we're going to work here. We don't work on the basis of, you know, people having more value than anybody else or being more significant than anybody else. It's all about our significance and worth and value from God's perspective, not someone else's. And if we see ourselves from God's perspective and know our identity from God's perspective, then it doesn't really matter what anyone else says or thinks, really. But when we see ourselves from God's perspective, we won't have to force that into any situation or try and outwork our call and make it happen, because if I don't make it happen, then I'm a failure. I've not fulfilled my purpose, therefore I'm nobody and nothing, because they get their value from the fact that they've succeeded. We have to give people the opportunity of failing, learning from making mistakes, and giving the permission to make the mistakes so that you can grow and learn from them. And a lot of people, you know, are afraid of making mistakes because of the reaction that people will have. So we have to have a safe environment where people can grow and flourish, and it's okay to make some mistakes and learn from them along your journey. You know, so yeah, I mean, it is a big issue, and there are a lot of dynamics around those issues.
And it's difficult getting out of the mindset if someone's really gifted isn't necessarily a reflection on their spiritual maturity. And in the traditional church, typically, if someone's really spiritually gifted, they're kind of looked at as more special than the next person because they must be, because look at how God they see and hear, and they do see and they do hear. And the other thing I want to, you're coming on that, but also, is this not also possibly more of a unique time of unfolding, where if you took people, mystics in the past, they tended to operate more alone with God, where now God's bringing us into union together, which is really what we're always supposed to, at the end, where we're supposed to be going anyway, to be a church without spot or wrinkle, a glorious church, in union with Christ together.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that there's a sense where you're right. A lot of the mystics would have been, you know, out in the desert or, you know, in the monastery or on their own or whatever. And a lot of them were on their own because they were rejected by everyone else who didn't understand them and everything else. So there's history in the past where, you know, people were loners because they weren't accepted, which you can understand. And of course, some of the forerunners in what we're doing have come from the same route. They've been rejected. You know, they've been rejected by other leaders and other churches and other things as being weird and wacky and out there. And some of them have created defense mechanisms to cope with that, which means they don't really get close to anyone relationally. So they're not the best models for relational connection in establishing ecclesias, because they don't have them and don't do them. Yeah, and so I sort of some of how I sort of use an illustration of this is there are some people who are explorers, and they explore new things, but they're not necessarily pioneers, because pioneers also explore, but they take the ground and establish it and form communities on that new ground. They don't just go to try and find the next things to explore. And that's where the relationship and the discipleship and the establishing territory comes in. You know, because if the pioneers who, let's say, pioneered into Canada and into the US had just gone around finding all these new places, but had never put down any roots or never put any foundations in or never staked any claims into those places, then they would still be empty wildernesses, because they would have just potentially just gone, oh, that's a really nice place. Great. I'm going to move on to find the next new place and the next new place and the next new place, rather than, no, we're going to establish foundations, which is exactly what, in terms of the Roman army and the principle of Castrapone, was they set up an administrative base from which they could then expand. They didn't just go into a country, try and take the land and then move on to the next land and leave it empty. There was a whole different way in which colonization was the purpose, not exploration. And my experience with some of the people who are explorers in these things, they have relational difficulties because of rejection in the past, and they don't necessarily find it easy to establish the sort of foundations in Ekklesia that we're talking about. Therefore, they're not in Ekklesia, and they tend to be more itinerant travelers, teachers, engagers, rather than those that have got a testimony of, well, this is how this works on the ground. And without a testimony, then all the teaching doesn't really have a foundation to outworking. It's just, well, we're going to explore more new things and more new things and more new things. Well, someone has to put them into practice. And God wants to establish these things as things we live in, not just go on to the next new teaching without having established the last and have it foundationally operating through Ekklesia. Because that, to me, is the way that God has chosen to do it. Now, don't put the old sort of church religious institution around that and try and make it like it's always been. It's new, and therefore God can give completely different understandings of what those blueprints might be. You know, we're not going to limit and put him in a box to say, well, it only looks like one thing, but it still has to be people. You know, it has to be people in relationship as living stones to be those that actually fill the blueprint and create what God is wanting to build and establish. And we need more people who are going to establish things. You know, it's like Joshua saying, well, we cross over into the promised land, but we're only moving through until we go and take Egypt and Syria and Babylonia and all the other places, because actually we're just going to pass through. No, they actually established a nation there. That was the land that God gave them, and from that base they were then supposed to fill the rest of the earth, just like Adam and Eve were given a garden to tend and cultivate, and to be a base from which they could fill the earth, subduing and bringing rule and dominion. You know, so you know, part of the thing is we need role models of this relational, foundational ecclesias, not just great teachers and explorers of new things. Otherwise, we'll never have anything on the ground. We need to equip the next generation. We need to establish storehouses for the harvest. And to be honest, I don't hear many of those sorts of people talking about a harvest. You know, I've never heard any of them talking about a harvest. They talk about government. They talk about, you know, amazing things in the heavens. But we have to see the harvest. And if we don't have a harvest, then I don't believe we're going to see Jesus return. You know, so we need to see before we move into the ages to come, we need to see something established here on the earth. As you say, for Jesus to come back for a church without spot, wrinkle, and blemish, which is going to mean we have to actually look like him and what he's calling us to look like.
Yeah. And Mike, just to continue a little further, the issue over the last 2,000 forever is that the same government is over the churches, say in the region where I live, And the fact is, so they're under that just like the general population. And what an ecclesia is doing is they're actually becoming an outpost in that region to bring the government of God so it starts to open up. And those outposts are going to start being set by God in all the different regions all over the place, so that His government starts to come out in those regions, and so that the churches and all that aren't under that government that they have been, the principalities and powers. They'll become the outposts of provision.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, and those are the cities of refuge, embassies of heaven. Those are what they are, storehouses. But they will be establishing the government of God and living under the government of God on earth as it is in heaven. And you're right, they will be occupying the atmosphere. You know, we need our own principalities and powers and rulers and thrones in the atmosphere, because none of those things are negative things. The only thing that is, they're at the moment occupied by wicked forces of darkness. Principalities, powers, rulers, thrones, they're all established by God. The atmosphere is filled with those that are from the wrong camp, if you like. We need to see them populated with those from heaven's camp. You know, but what that does, effectively, there's this sense of what it is. It's opening up an open heaven. That's what it's creating, so everybody can hear God for themselves. You know, we're not looking to provide another covering. We're looking to provide another opening. So we open up heaven for people to engage by maintaining that open heaven governmentally. And that's what we're looking to do, establish open heaven. And then everyone can find and fulfill their destiny within that, rather than another governmental system that puts another covering over people. Yeah, because government is supposed to be foundational, not covering. And I think that, again, is really important, that we embrace that in what God is doing. So we don't establish a mixture of old and new. Yeah, it needs to be a new wineskin, not an old wineskin with a few new patches stuck on. Yeah, which is why we have to go to the roots of change and transformation, and not just look to change the terminology. It has to be foundationally and fundamentally different, which is why the government of it is so important, and the heart and the attitude of that government has so important. Because Jesus basically said, learn from me because I'm gentle and humble in heart. And those are the two characteristics that are absolutely vital for the Joshua generation of any governmental benches. They must be gentle and humble in heart. And we have to work that out in practice.
And that's why when we talk about identification in the gender or calling, there's one other identification an ecclesia must have, it seems to me anyway, is that our identification is only in Christ, not someone leading us, because then that becomes our identification through Christ. We don't need an intermediary, it's directly with Him. He is our only identification.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that really is why everything starts in relationship. Once I know who I am because I'm in Him and He's in me, then I am gentle in heart, because gentleness is the strength of knowing my identity and surrendering it totally to Him and for His purpose and not my own. You know, and I think that's what God really is looking for, those who are willing to pursue relationship, not experience. You know, my experience comes through my relationship, and it has to be an experiential relationship, absolutely, but I'm not chasing after the next experiences. I want to be in the rest of that relationship, which will lead me into whatever God has got within my destiny to fulfill. You know, and for me, that is working together in relationship to others, being part of what God is doing, not independent or isolated from it.
I would also say it would seem to me to whether even if you're not totally, for example, in my situation, I would think to myself, if I wasn't drawn to an ecclesia and I was growing up, I'd want to come into relationship with them until I was drawn away by God to where I'm supposed to be, so I can learn how to operate with my spirit intertwining with other people to come into a common mandate. Because with more than one person, that's where the real power comes, when you're in a common mandate together, not individually. You want to put 1,000 plate, two put 10,000.
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to find it's going to be like an atom bomb exploding on the earth of his kingdom.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But for that to take place, we all have to be willing to be living sacrifices, here to serve God's purpose, not ours, and realizing the best way we can find fulfillment and satisfaction in life is to fulfill our destiny agreed with our spirit. Our soul just needs to come into agreement and alignment with that, which is the hard bit. That's the tension, the flesh against the spirit, and all the things that go on, soul and spirit. That's the tension. And it's through relationship that God outworks that tension to bring change and transformation. It's not often done totally independently on our own, because God has designed us to be working in relationships that actually create the opportunities for growth and change and transformation. Because we have a culture of honor that promotes growth and change and transformation by helping each other to identify the areas where we need to change and we need to grow. If I'm on my own, then no one is going to tell me anything other than God. No one's going to tell me anything. And actually, sometimes it's very difficult to listen to what God's saying when it doesn't really fit in with our way of thinking. Which is why sometimes the confrontation of being in relationship with others actually stimulates us to go back to God with, why did I feel that way? Why did I react that way? Why did I sense this? What was going on when I felt offended or hurt or upset? Because actually it's the relationships that enable us to grow and to mature and to love each other and forgive each other and to outwork the reality of these things relationally. And if you are guarded in your relationships because of past rejection, fear, hurt, disappointment, there will be a level of immaturity and a lack of willingness to be open and honest with people, which will never get the job done. Because I have nothing to fear anybody knowing my struggles or the issues I work through or anything else, because it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks of me. It matters what God thinks of me that counts. So I don't really mind people knowing that I'm not perfect and I'm working things. So I don't have to hold up a particular standard of reputation. It's God I'm here to serve and please. And it's what he thinks about me and how he loves me that enables me to be who I am. But within that, he uses the fact that he's called people to gather together. And I think that comes out in people's willingness to submit mutually to one another, which again is what it talks about, mutual submission. I receive from someone, that person in who they are, and they receive from me who I am, and we're in relationship with one another, and we value each other in that sense, and therefore we can grow. When I'm independent and isolated, it's not as easy. Which is why so many of the people who we've seen as mystics and things in the past ended up going off into some weird doctrine, because they didn't have the relationship to bring things together and to come into an agreement over things. Which is why benches of three are so important. They safeguard to ensure that we're all bringing to the bench who we are and what we're hearing and getting the overall picture, rather than the one person, the senior leader, who really the others submit to. And that just will never work in what God is establishing.
One of the confusing things is, so you can find people, and even going back to the church where we were part of, is that people that can be, even in leadership, can be so loving and caring, as long as those people are in line with their agenda. But the minute they come out of alignment with their agenda, then it changes. But they are loving and giving people as long as you're in that agenda, which kind of comes because they have those characteristics of Christ as long as you're in that agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's complicated because, in a sense, they could say the same. You have a blueprint and you're saying everyone needs to fit into it. So the same accusation could be made, but the way in which it's actually outworked is different. We value people and people's destiny, and we want people to outwork their destiny, which, if God has brought them to be part of what he's doing, then they will find the freedom to be able to do that themselves in the way that they're called to do it. Hence, for instance, you have a bench of three that has a blueprint. The bench of three doesn't have to establish everything within that blueprint. You entrust others who are called to do that. So our bench, for instance, our 7 mountains, I didn't determine what those 7 mountains were. Those that were called to them and went and heard God themselves brought the blueprint for their mountain, that mountain, and for the declarations that go with that mountain and the mandate that mountain has. All we did was say, we have 7 mountains here. Who feels called to those mountains? So it's very different. In the old system, the leaders would have actually established what all those things were and would have told people so that people could then fit into it. What we're saying is we have a blueprint here, but actually it's the people who determine what that blueprint is actually outworked in, not those that receive it. And again, that is being willing to give others permission to engage God for themselves. And I think that's the difference in what you're saying. If someone didn't fit into the agenda, they had no space to be themselves within it, rather than, okay, if you feel called to this, you have to develop this in your own relationship with God and hear God so that we can all come to an agreement of what this is, rather than, well, the leaders say what this is and then you have to fit in with it. Now the leaders say you have permission to go and hear God so that you can inform the whole what this aspect is. And that's totally different, I think.
I think that really covers that area really well, Mike.
Yeah.
And I know it helps me kind of as I try to understand how we're supposed to be plotting the law.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue because of the nature of changing from an old to a new way of thinking and outworking. And we just got to be really careful that we don't just try and use old methodologies, give them new names, but they're actually the same thing. This has to be new. It has to come from a heavenly perspective. It has to come from the order of Melchizedek, lion, ox, eagle, man. It needs the fullness of that government expressed through it. It has to be new. Which is why it's so difficult. But also so important that we actually see these things outworked, and don't get stuck in old ways.
And as this rolls out, you know, it has to be that we're just going to see groups come together in harmony together all over the earth, all over the place.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah. Well, otherwise we won't have anything that will be any different from the world or what's gone before. You know, and it's the relational element of what God is doing that is important, and that isn't the superficial. You know, it's not like, oh, we all look like the same, or we can all go and we can all do the same things. I mean, I've seen what people will do to try and fit in. You know, and that isn't what God is saying here. You don't have to be like somebody else or do what someone else does. You just have to be you. You know, I know how difficult. If you went into a gathering that were having a huge sort of, I don't know, glory party or something, and you didn't feel that you wanted to be expressive and kick your feet in the air, but you were just engaging God personally and everything else, the pressure to conform is really high because there's an expectation of, whoa, if you're not doing this, then you're not really in this because you're not outwardly conforming, and it's not about outward confirmation. You know, I've been in those settings, and I'm very happy to, you know, have a wonderful time in intimacy with God, and to, you know, I've laughed with the best of them and rolled around the floor with the best of them, you know, but I don't feel any need, if that's not what God is doing with me at that point in time, I'm not going to put it on or try and pretend that I'm having a good time kicking my feet in the air or getting drunk in the spirit or doing any of those things just to fit in. If it's not real, if it's real, then I'll absolutely go with whatever God is wanting to do in me. But I don't feel I have to conform. You know, I can go into a drunken party situation in the spirit and have wonderful intimacy with God, but show no signs outwardly that I'm drunk in the spirit. Now, sometimes, you know, usually when I've come out of encounters, I'm somewhat glazed from the encounter, but I don't have to demonstrate that by my freedom, you know, and my freedom is I can be me. I don't have to conform to anything, whether it be new or old. I can just be me, and I know that that's what God is looking for, to us to be genuinely who he's called us to be and not have to conform to a particular norm. And that norm of being in that type of environment and feeling you have to conform with that type of environment is no different than being in a situation where you're having to go through liturgy. We've just developed a new form of liturgy, which is we do this now. You know, what we need to do is come into the presence of God and be led by his Spirit and engage in how his Spirit wants to lead, not just we know what we're going to do before we ever get there. You know, it's got to be as the Spirit leads, and therefore things can be new, things can be different, things can happen which are not just conform to a new or old paradigm. You know, and that's why there's a danger in labeling something as this is the way we do it. You know, in the new order we do this, you know, and it's like, well, okay, you know, that isn't what God wants. He doesn't want us to look all the same and be clones. He wants us to be different because he's made us different. Anyway, all right, okay.